Today is Thursday, June 10th, 2021. I am interviewing Edward. Do you go by Edward?
Yeah, Edward or Ed is fine.
Ed Roelofs at the Walla Walla Armory in Walla Walla, Washington. Again, I'm interviewing Ed Roelofs, and I want to say carefully, and I'm going to spell your name Roelofs, and that is pronounced Ed Roelofs.
Correct.
All right, very good. And you are, explain your active duty Army Reserve. I'm going to have you tell us.
I am currently serving in the Washington Army National Guard in the AGR program, which is the Active Guard and Reserve program, meaning that we are active duty within the National Guard.
Okay, very good. And Ed, where were you born?
I was born in Blue Island, Illinois.
All right, and the date of birth was July 28th, 1969.
That's correct.
And Dixie Ferguson, that's me, and Vic Phillips, the videographer, are conducting the interview today. Okay, Ed, what ward and branch of service did you serve?
I've served in Operation Iraqi Freedom in Iraq 3 separate times, all with the United States Army.
And could you give the dates of those separate times, year-wise?
My first tour was from January of 2005 to January 2006. The second one was August of 2007 through around September of 2008. And then I went back in December of 2009 and didn't come back until February of 2011. That one was a little longer.
Okay. And let's see, were you drafted or probably you enlisted?
I enlisted originally in March of 1991 in the Texas Army National Guard, where I served for 6 years and then elected to get out, start a family and a career. After 9/11, I felt that I had some more to give, so I re-enlisted in the Texas Army National Guard. And I stayed there through January of 2020 when I transferred to the Washington Army National Guard and moved to Walla Walla.
And why did you come to Walla Walla, or Washington?
I served a stateside tour in 2012 and 13 at Joint Base Lewis McChord, Washington, where I met my wife and we got married. And then we ended up moving back to Texas in an effort to bring her closer to family and home. I requested a transfer up here and it was granted, and that's when I came back up here.
Was she in the service?
She was not a service member, but she worked for the Oregon Army National Guard, which is how I met her.
And her name?
Her name is Alita.
And you have children?
I don't have children with her, but I have 3 adult children.
And if you like to name them?
My oldest is Brittany, who is a captain in the United States Army. My son Jacob is a private in the Texas Army National Guard. And then my youngest daughter Erin just graduated from Texas State University.
Excellent. And I'm assuming father had a lot of influence having them join the military.
I would guess so. I never pushed them to do it. They all did it on their own.
Yeah, that's great. That's fantastic. So you're from Illinois, but you went to Texas.
My family moved to Texas when I was about 10, and I grew up there and generally consider myself a Texan.
Oh no, that's a good thing. What city in Texas?
In the Dallas-Fort Worth area.
Oh yeah. Do you like football?
I do. Go Cowboys.
Good. All right. And then why did you pick the service branch that you're in?
My father before me was in the Army, and my older brother, and I felt a connection to the Army, and that's where I went.
Yeah. So it's definitely a family tradition.
It is.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And when you mentioned 9/11, thousands of you heard the call.
I believe we did. It was interesting. The first drill I attended with the Texas National Guard, when I came back, there were 6 of us that had all served previously and came back. We all came back at the same time and went on. Most of us are still in. One didn't come back. But
when you, and we'll get to this a little bit later, but I can imagine when you got to the Middle East, you met a lot of fellow military there for the same reason, because of 9/11.
I did.
Yeah, which speaks volumes about our patriotism. Okay, now, do you recall your first days in the service? Where and what was it like?
Again, March of 1991, I went to basic training at Fort Knox, Kentucky, to be an M60A3 tank crewman. And I can remember thinking, this was a terrible mistake. Why did I do this?
Because?
Just culture shock of the military. And it was, at that point, Desert Storm was still going on when I got there. And it was probably a little more intense than normal because they assumed that was going to be a long, drawn-out war. They didn't know it would be so short. And it was pretty intensive. But by the time it was over, I was raring to go and happy to be there.
Yeah, you were. Yeah. Specifically, each day, part of your training, Ken, if there was a typical routine in a day, would you call it boot camp or basic boot camp? Okay.
Basic training boot camp.
Describe if there's a typical day.
It was very typical. I was there. We didn't have a separation between basic training and our job school. It was what's called one station unit training for armor crewmen. So it was 16 weeks straight through. And I remember wake up was at 03:30 every morning, and we did PT from 4 to 5:30, which was painful. And then we had 15 minutes to fall back out for breakfast, and then breakfast was 06 to 07, and then we came back to the barracks, and you had to run everywhere. I remember we would march to chow, but when you finished chow, individually obviously, you had to run the half-mile back to the barracks and get right back in there, and it was clean up everything. Sweep, mop, scrub, beds made, barracks ready to go, and then back outside by 7:30 or so to march to class, which was a couple of miles away always. I'm pretty sure they do that by design. And do whatever task was on the schedule that day, march back to the chow hall, run to the barracks, but we weren't allowed to go in because they were clean. So we would literally stand in formation outside till everyone was back. Right face, march back to class for the remainder of the day, which usually ended around 16:30, 1700, and we'd go straight to the chow hall, eat dinner chow, come back, and then we had generally each night from about 6 to 7:30 or 8 o'clock to do your laundry, shine your boots. That was back when we had black boots. Get them ready to go, make sure your uniforms were squared away, take shower. We only took showers at night, which was odd. They wouldn't let us take them after PT in the morning. And go to bed. Lights out was at 9 o'clock, and then back at 03:30 awake every day.
Was this group sleep?
So it was, we didn't have an open bay. We had the unit that I was in, I don't know what different people had in different places. We had 12-man rooms. So there were 12 of us in there.
After the lights went out, could you mumble and grumble with each other, or it was just shut-off time?
You could, but generally on a daily basis, we were so tired. I don't remember hearing a whole lot. Near the end, when graduation was coming close and people were a little more used to the routine, there was some banter back and forth, but for the most part, you were exhausted. I can remember going straight to sleep.
16 weeks.
16 weeks.
Explain why all the marching?
Discipline, attention to detail. I think it instills, and they still do it to a large extent, the getting used to someone telling you what to do and you reacting instantly. You know, forward, stop, left, right. It's just about getting used to not being an individual, functioning as a group. That's something that's big in the military is functioning as a group, because it doesn't work unless you're working together. And if someone's not working together when you're marching, it shows real fast.
Yeah.
And,
describe the charming drill sergeants, the instructors.
And these people, I'll never forget Drill Sergeant Anderson, Drill Sergeant Brummett, and Drill Sergeant Malone. They had very different personalities. Some were, and I guess it's by design, in that, for example, Drill Sergeant Anderson was a hard case. You did not want to cross this man, or you would, I think it was his thing.
What would happen?
You would do push-ups until the walls were sweating, was what he liked to say. But he would just make life miserable for you. Whereas some of the others might be a little more reasonable, not any less harsh if you made a mistake, but they might tend to explain a little better what you did before you got punished for it. Kind of like good cop, bad cop. Maybe think of it that way. But they were firm, but they were fair.
I'm curious, were they recruited to do that, or did they want to do that?
So I'm assuming that back then it was the same as it is now. Drill sergeant duty happens one of two ways. You can either request it, or you can be what's called DA selected, where the Department of the Army just randomly picks NCOs in the rank of E5 or E6 and says, you're going to go be a drill sergeant.
Because you'd have to really have kind of a certain characteristics.
Yes and no. They, the drill sergeant school, I know some people now that have gone through it. It's 9 weeks long, and they teach them the psychology behind it, how to present that menacing figure to get people in line, even though you may not necessarily be a menacing person. So they teach them that. It's far more psychological than physical. I know now, but at the time when you're an 18-year-old kid, you don't know it, to get people in line. But some are volunteers and some are not. But it's a tough job. Those people work regularly 18 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's why they generally go what they call on the trail. For drill sergeants, 2 years, and then they got to go do something else because it's stressful.
The burnout.
And the burnout is high.
I bet there's not an ounce of fat on them.
There's not. Those guys are fit. They have to be able to outdo the privates. And they do.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. They had them. Very many washouts in your class?
We started with, I want to say about 80. And I know we lost probably 3 or 4 to like injuries, medical stuff. And I don't know what happened to them. They may have rolled back and continued. And we had a few that just straight up refused to train. They quit basically, and they get processed out. I want to say we graduated with probably 95% of those that started.
That's good. Okay, was this a 4-year recruitment? 4-year?
My initial enlistment was 6 years.
6 years. Okay. After the 16 weeks, what happened?
So I was in the National Guard, so I complete my 16 weeks of training, and then I go back to the state of Texas, and then I'm a drilling National Guardsman. I do my 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks in the summer.
And you did that for how long?
I did that for 6 years.
Oh, okay. Okay, so fast forward, let's see the timeline here. Iraq War started in spring of 2003. And where were you at that time?
So post 9/11 in early 2002, I rejoined the Texas Army National Guard, and we were drilling. I think everyone at that point knew that something was building up to happen, and we were just kind of waiting for it to happen. And then it was in late 2003, months after the invasion of Iraq, when my unit received the warning order that we were going to mobilize the following summer.
And you kind of knew.
We knew it was coming.
For you.
We did.
Were you, for the most part, pretty prepared? You're trained, you're really ready to go, serve the country?
We were very motivated. The morale was high in my unit at that point. We were ready to go.
To do what?
That's an interesting point, because at the time I was a tank crewman and we were in an armor unit. We had Abrams tanks, and we assumed that we were going to take our tanks and go do tank things. And as the mission got closer, we found out that we were not bringing our tanks with us. We were going with Humvees instead to do a physical security and patrol type mission. So that necessitated us going to Fort Hood, Texas when we mobilized, and we spent about 5 months there learning this new mission.
Humvee mission.
Yep.
Did you ever use the tanks?
Nope, we did not even bring them with us.
Because there were tankers over there.
There were, but after the initial invasion of Iraq, there was not an organized army to fight, which is what tanks do, tank on tank kind of battle. And in an insurgency battle in an urban environment, tanks are heavy. They break down, literally drive too close to a building and it can shake the ground to the point where it falls down. That happened.
Really?
Yeah, and they didn't want to just intimidate and terrorize the Iraqi people. They wanted a slightly less menacing presence, and I personally believe that's what negated that change in mission for us.
Interesting. Oh, okay. So you got your call-up order. Tell me again the month and year when you actually boarded the plane.
So we did our train up at Fort Hood first. That was part of it. We spent 5 months there, and we got to go home for Christmas. And I want to say it was January 3rd, 2005. We got on the plane and went to Kuwait.
Okay. And was that a large contingency of you going over?
We went as an entire brigade. There was about 3,500 of us that all went. It was the largest deployment from Texas since World War II.
Wow,
It was
really?
kind of a big deal at the time.
What did they tell you your mission was going to be going over?
So a lot of the details you don't get until you get there. We knew it was going to be a physical security type mission, meaning securing a base, possibly the area around it, and that's what it turned out to be. But every place handles it differently, and we didn't get our specifics until we got to our final destination.
Okay, so you arrive was the plane ride over quiet?
It was. There was a lot of nervous apprehension. It's a long ride. We stopped in Shannon, Ireland, and then went on to, we stopped in, it was Gander, Newfoundland. We went from Texas to Newfoundland to Ireland to Kuwait, which the grand total is like a 23 hour flight.
It's a long flight.
It is.
You land in Kuwait, you get out of that plane, and what do you experience?
It's kind of like when things start getting real. We land in Kuwait, and there's a huge armed escort to take us from the airport in Kuwait City to the FOB we went to, which at the time was the Forward Operating Base in Kuwait, which at the time was Camp Burien. And you get there, and they assign you to tents and
Tents.
big, nice air-conditioned tents because it's hot. Even we were there in January. It was kind of cold, but it got hot.
How hot?
So the hottest I ever saw, and I have a picture somewhere of a thermometer. I came back from R&R. We're backtracking. I came back from R&R in the summer of 2005, and when we landed in Kuwait, it was 132 degrees outside. Kuwait is much hotter than Iraq. I don't know why that is, but.
Okay, so you're there when it's cooler. You're going to your tent.
So the escorts bring us in, and we get assigned our tents, and then they tell us there's some administrative requirements you have to do before you can go over the border into Iraq. One of the first things we had to do was go to the range, which I thought was odd, but they wanted to make sure everybody's weapons were still zeroed, and all this is kind of building up. It's just like, okay, they're making sure we can shoot straight. Things are kind of getting real, and we come back, and then we're going to ground convoy from Kuwait all the way to Taqaddum Air Base in Iraq, where we were going to ultimately.
What was the name?
Taqaddum.
Never heard of that one. Taqaddum.
It's TQ. It's an air base that's about 30 miles west of Baghdad. And it's a 2-day drive, and early, this even in 2005, I guess that wasn't that early, but it's early enough in the war. We still had soft-skinned vehicles. We didn't have armored Humvees or anything, and there were units coming out. I remember coming out of Iraq, going home, that had homemade armor made for their vehicles. They welded things on the side out of scrap steel and everything else, and they were taking it off and throwing it in giant piles so they could transport their vehicles home. And this was a huge benefit of being a National Guard unit, is we have people from all walks of life, and we had some welders. And at one point they said, take the trucks, go to that pile of scrap metal, start armoring up the trucks. And we had
the American can do.
We had about 48 hours, and they armored up every vehicle in our convoy with pieces and parts, and we had sandbags on the floor and things, everything we could find. And the night before we left, I remember coming into my tent, and this is another one of those things that you never forget, is the supply sergeant came in and started dropping crates of ammunition. And it was one of those moments. It was the first time in my life where they had handed out live ammunition and we weren't on a range. and it was like, kind of a gut check moment. But we loaded up, and we were still young and excited and ready to do our thing.
Did you feel prepared?
I did at that point. We had been through a lot. We got all the newest equipment the Army had at the time. We were well trained, functioning as a team. We got along for the most part. I was pretty confident, feeling good, and then they made the drive from Kuwait.
Okay, you were out. I'm sorry, you were in Kuwait. How long before you took off?
About a week. We spent about a week there.
Okay, you got the word. We're going north.
Yep. And then next morning, everybody lined up, and the 3,500 were all going to different locations in Iraq. Some flew, some drove. We drove, and there was only about 500 of us.
Only? That's a lot.
Well, 500 people, and we were spread out over 200 plus vehicles in a giant convoy, and we.
I am so curious about this ride up there. Go ahead.
It was uneventful. It was very anticlimactic. We were expecting war, and nothing happened.
What did you see along the way?
A lot of camels. It's desolate open desert in southern Iraq. A lot of open desert. Some fires burning in the distance. Lots of camels. They intentionally avoided going through any towns or cities because we didn't want to attract any attention. We had to go through Nasiriya, which was the first stop on the first night, to a base there, and going through the city was a little eye-opening, and it was also something odd. I discovered that some of the Iraqis that were kind of begging for stuff would intentionally, and I only found this out later, they would line up along the road, little kids and adults, and just have dirt on their face and make you feel terrible for them. And they warned us, don't throw anything to them because they'll run out in the road, they'll get run over by a truck. Don't. And they're not as bad off as you think. And we were like, this can't be. These people look terrible, like they're all desolate and about to die. And then as you get past this group and get into the city, you realize the city is still functioning. They have taxis, they have stores that are open, and people are clean. They were kind of pulling on our heartstrings on purpose.
Kind of staged.
There were people that did need help, but that initial bunch, when you first see them, it was heart-wrenching. Like, oh.
Were they, obviously they weren't afraid of you.
No, they weren't afraid. They wanted us to give them whatever we would throw them, which all we had was MREs at that point, but I don't know. But that was interesting. So we spent the night there. That was uneventful. Lined up our trucks, refueled.
Now wait, so you stopped at Nasiriya.
Mm-hmm.
How did you sleep?
On the ground beside the trucks. We had cots.
Did you have cots?
Mm-hmm. And
was it restful, or
no,
looking over your shoulder?
We didn't know what to expect, so I think a lot of us were nervous and didn't sleep well at all. But
didn't it seem a little surreal? Here I am, my first night, and look where I am.
Absolutely. But again, we had no idea what to expect to begin with. It seemed, I don't know, it seemed kind of warlike. We're at war. We're here. We're beside our trucks. Got our weapons. We're ready to go. But nothing really happened.
No incidents along the way.
Nope.
Well, that's good. So, how many miles or hours to your destination?
So we spent about 9 hours on the road that first day, and then about the same amount the next day before we rolled into Taqaddum.
Whoa, Iraq is a huge country.
It is a big country. It is. And our trucks don't go very fast either. The roads weren't the best, but they were paved. It wasn't that bad.
It was paved.
Yeah.
And did you have any kind of air cover at all, or you're on your own out there?
You're on your own out there.
Yeah. But all you saw was sand and camels?
Sand, camels, the occasional car on the side of the road. At that point in the war, cars were not allowed to be on the road with military vehicles. So if there were civilian traffic out there, they would pull far off the road and stop and get away from you.
Well, what were the camels doing?
They would
Are these nomads?
Yeah, they're still out there to this day. There would be someone out there with them all the time. I don't know what they do with them, but they're out there.
So we're talking like going back to Bible history almost.
Wearing the long robes with the big stick, leading camels around. I don't know what they do with them. I don't know if they eat them or I don't know, but they're out there.
Were you allowed to take any photos?
We took all kinds of pictures. Yeah.
Well, anyway, okay, so you're Where'd you spend your second night?
So the second night we rolled into where we were going to ultimately end up, and that was Taqaddum Air Base. And it was fairly late when we got in. We parked our vehicles in like a makeshift parking area. This was a huge base because it's an airfield. And the Marine Corps ran that base, and they had an air unit there. And we were going to work for the Marine Corps.
And what was their mission?
So the Marine Corps was a full Marine expeditionary force. They had everything there, from infantry to air support, logistics, you name it. They had it all there. There was, I don't know, probably 10 or 12,000 of them there.
When America goes to war.
Oh, they go. They bring the kitchen sink. And the next day, our leadership went and talked to them and got the rundown on what we were going to do and who was going to do what. And the missions changed as we were there. We did different things. So my platoon was attached to one of the other companies, and our mission was to do external security. So the base, it was big. It covered probably 10 square miles, and we were responsible for security outside the wire. I can't say the exact number. I want to say it was like 5 miles in every direction around the base. If something happened more than 5 miles out, we didn't deal with it. Someone else would deal with it. It was basically just the surrounding area. And then some of the other companies had the towers around the base. They manned the towers. Others manned the gates, the access points. But we were with the patrol company.
What might you anticipate when you're on perimeter security?
For what we did, the biggest threat to us was roadside bombs, ambushes, getting shot at, just those kind of hostilities, and that's.
And they did happen.
They did.
On a regular basis.
Probably not as regular as you'd think. In the 12 months that we were there, I did the patrols for 10 months. The last 2 months we did something else, which we can get to. But while we ran the patrols, we encountered probably 8, maybe 9 events while we were there. Roadside bombs or getting shot at.
What would an event look like?
Typically they were IEDs. You're driving along slowly. We're looking for things, but you just can't see them all. We found numerous before they went off, but some of them found us.
So would it be in the ground, in a truck, or?
There's a lot of different ways they employ them. The ones that we encountered were typically either buried on the side of the road or placed in something. They would change the way they did things. One we found the wrong way, rolled up in an inner tube. That's one that I got to see up close. Others were buried, and you might or might not see the dug up dirt. Sometimes there would be dug up dirt with nothing in it, and they would do that and watch to see how you reacted to it.
Okay, and what was just harassment? What was their goal? What did they think just to wear you down, harassment, or what? Wear
you down, harassment, try to kill you if they can.
And they were there basically for the long haul. And furthermore, who were they?
I don't know that that's ever been really clearly defined. As a whole, the Iraqi people that I encountered and dealt with were pretty pleasant for the most part. The insurgents, it's been said over the years, have come from other countries, been foreign fighters, but I couldn't tell you specifically.
Really? Yeah. You've heard of Syrians, Iranians, but you couldn't identify.
Not at my level. We were just a company doing our thing. We reported everything up, and the intel people investigated things, but I don't know what they ever determined.
So you did say that you did capture some of them.
Not the people, the IEDs. Some of them.
But you never saw who did it then? Huh.
They're pretty good. We were in a somewhat urban area, surrounded by buildings and everything else, so they could be hiding in plain sight, and you'd never know who they were.
So you never met one of, what would you call an insurgent, terrorist? What would you call them?
Insurgents.
Insurgent.
Those are the bad guys, the insurgents. That's who we were looking for.
Yeah. So you never personally interviewed one of them?
My job was not to do that. My job was to engage them. We caught people that were suspected bad actors. intel would say, there's a bad guy in an area, he's driving a black BMW, it sticks out like a sore thumb. If you see one, get it. And, sure enough, we see a black BMW in a country that doesn't have very many nice cars. So we block the road, stop them, and we would do like a gunshot residue test to tell if they've handled explosives. It comes up positive. You open the trunk and it's got suitcases full of money. It's like, obviously this person's up to no good of some sort, but at our level, we hand them over to the intel people and they do their thing. And I don't know, they don't always report back to us. That wasn't what I did.
That was yeah. Okay, on the base, was there, first of all, your living circumstances, and if there was a daily mission, can you kind of give a profile of that?
So our living conditions, we lived in a tent. It was a GP medium tent.
General purpose.
Yep. That had, it was stacked with sandbags about 5 feet high all the way around. And this tent, if you know how big a GP medium is, it had 4 window unit air conditioners stuck through the sandbags, which in the summer would keep it at a cool 95 in there, which felt good coming out of 120.
Oh, yeah.
But we didn't have, I think a GP medium normally holds like 40 people. There was only, I want to say 16 of us in there. It was divided. We put up little walls and divided it into sections of 2, 2, 2, and 2 down around it. And it was terrible. It deteriorated in the weather. It would leak if it rained, and it does rain in Iraq. And it had a plywood floor that was kind of bent and creaky. And
I want to know if there were rats.
I never saw rats.
Ooh, okay, too hot for the rats.
Or they don't have them. We generally, you didn't eat in your tent because we didn't want to attract them, but I never saw any. There were the occasional spider. But that part wasn't bad. And the mission cycle when I was doing patrols was difficult. It was
what was that?
Because you had to be unpredictable. You didn't ever want the bad guys to say they're coming out at 3 o'clock. So when we were on the active mission cycle, we would have, say, 72 hours, and they would give our leadership like a set of missions that needed to be run, and it was up to them to spread them out within there. Well, most of these missions were 6 to 10 hours in length, and in that 72 hours, you get very little time off, almost no sleep. And then typically you would come in when you came off the mission cycle, and you would have a QRF cycle, which means
QR is
the quick reaction force. So when you're on QRF, you didn't go to your tent. There was a specific QRF tent. You would line your trucks up outside the tent. The doors open, your body armor sitting there, and you would go in that tent, and it had cots in it where you could relax and try to sleep. But if something happened, you had to be able to be in your truck and rolling out the gate in like 5 minutes.
Yeah, not real restful.
Not real restful, not super comfortable.
Yeah.
But you would do generally 24 hours of that, and then you would generally get 24 hours of nothing going on time where you could actually relax, try to sleep, and then the mission cycle started over. But in that 10 months we did that, I think we got that 24-hour off day probably half a dozen times.
Wow.
And the reason being, at that point in time, everyone still got R&R during their tour, 15 days to go home. And any myriad of other things where someone might be hurt, injured, emergency leave, or whatever, there were never enough people to man the missions. So it was almost always, you'd be shorthanded on your missions and man QRF, and then you'd immediately start helping someone else on manning their mission cycle, or stay on QRF for another day, or something along that lines to make sure the missions got handled, because there just weren't enough.
Did you feel, was the morale high? Did you feel like you were making a difference?
In the area we were in, I never really noticed a difference. Our morale internally stayed high for the most part, but people got tired. They got so tired. There were times you'd get a threat, and we didn't always know what it was. The higher headquarters would say, hey, there's a threat on the base, so the patrols need to all stay out. So all of the patrol elements would go out, and at one point we stayed out for a week, didn't come back. We'd come in and get fuel.
Go out on patrol for a week.
Yep. And we would send a truck in one at a time to get fuel and come back out, get fuel and come back out, and then stay out.
Okay, going on patrol, what did that mean?
So there were different kinds at different times. Typically, we were in our trucks, 4 Humvees, with when we had the people, 4 people per truck, 16 of us. Most of the time, it ended up about 3 people per truck. And we would either we would do a presence patrol where we would just make ourselves seen and drive through all the little villages and towns in our area. Yeah. Sometimes we would drive through nice and slow, trying to draw out someone that might want to do harm, and other times we would...
You're called a magnet?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
And other times we would drive through real fast as like a show of force, like get out of our way, we're coming through. There's different things on different days. Sometimes they might be dismounted patrols because you couldn't see down all the dark alleys and everything, so our trucks would line up on the road with just a driver and a gunner on the machine gun, and then everyone else would dismount and spread out beside the truck and go in between the houses.
I would be crying for my mommy.
It was and we would do that at all hours of the day and night.
Now that alone would be so exhausting.
It was. If you walk 5 or 6 miles in 120-degree heat with all of your body armor on and everything else it can be, and
how much weight did you carry, would you say?
so I weighed my vest once, and my vest had my ammunition on it and frag grenades and everything else, and it weighed just under 70 pounds.
And hot.
And it doesn't breathe at all. No.
Well, okay, sidetracking for 1 minute, were you able to communicate quite a bit with people back home?
Not in those days. At that point, there were no cell phones that would work there. We had a phone center on the other side of the space, which was pretty big. And sometimes you might have to wait an hour to get in there, and you had to use a phone card to call home, and it was painful. I think that year I called home about every 2 to 3 weeks, and it might be a 5-minute call.
Long time.
Yeah.
Okay, refresh me, at that point, were you married?
Yes.
Oh, tough one.
I was married then. My kids were little, and
tough one.
and then they blew up the phone center, so it was out for a couple of months.
Sure,
Yeah.
Oh, that's a tough one. Both sides, and just a comment here, and oh, God bless the families that go along. Yeah, anyway.
Absolutely.
So these patrols would be very nerve-wracking. And the idea was a little bit of harassment, the presence, you're there,
And trying to draw out the
Oh, you said
insurgents.
that. Yes.
Kind of
Did
make
that
our...
really work?
Not while we were there, and we were kind of accused of maybe looking too ready. Like they kind of encouraged us to look exhausted, like let your rifle hang down and make yourself look kind of weak, so they would get confident and attack you. But that's really hard to do when you're in a circumstance.
Kind of like a psychological warfare.
Kind of. But I think too many of us looked too ready, maybe. And that's, I'm not saying anyone was super tough. It was just a matter of being on edge and nervous, and I'm going to keep my weapon up here ready and not let it dangle and stuff
Absolutely.
like that.
Were the time you were on your first tour, were there any incidents when you're going out on patrol?
Yeah, IEDs. All we hit that first year were roadside bombs. Lots of them.
Lots of them.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like lots, I guess. It was probably a dozen or so the whole year. So it was less than one a month.
But always on edge because of them.
You never know.
How much damage would they do?
So it depends on how sophisticated it is, how close to the vehicle it hits. There's a lot. We were pretty lucky in that a lot of them were near misses. When we went on the highway, we went fast to make it difficult for them to time it, because they were command detonated. At that point in time, they were using...
They would see you coming.
They'd see you coming, and what they were using was a cordless telephone. That was the means of choice. Remember the old cordless phone? When you lose the handset on the base, you hit the button to make it ring. That's what they did, and they would use the handset on the bomb and then sit somewhere where they had electricity and it was plugged in, and watch you to go by and make it ring, and that would set it off. So sometimes they got lucky, and sometimes they didn't. The one that I guess got the luckiest, it took the entire front end off of one of our Humvees. That was
this is getting pretty personal, but this has got to be mentally a lot of wear and tear. How did most of you hold up with all of that? How did you do it?
I think everybody had their somebody. I've found with my soldiers and the people that I've talked to. My bunkmate, who was next to me, we were close to the same age, and everyone kind of paired up with people they liked and got along with. We did a lot of talking at night on our off time, and
Very therapeutic.
it is, and I think you have to talk about it. You know, we didn't really have anyone. We had one guy kind of, I won't say crack up, but need to take a knee and go get some help. But everyone else, for the most part, kept talking. And my platoon sergeant, who's one of my best friends to this day, was a great mentor, and would get people talking about anything. Because, and I've discovered as I got older and went on other tours, if you can get someone talking about anything, baseball, whatever, the conversation's gonna steer around to what's bothering them. I think it's just human nature, and it works. And
Interesting. Did they prepare you at all back in training for such as this?
so not in the early days. I don't think they knew what to do. But I will say my second and third tours later on, they did a lot, and they had stuff deployed downrange, combat stress places you could go and people to talk to, and I used them, and it was very helpful.
Any chaplains amongst you?
We had a chaplain that was with us. I have a funny story about the chaplain. Want to hear this?
Yeah. Please.
So, when we deployed, we got the new desert uniforms with the desert boots, and our chaplain apparently had either big feet or small feet. I can't remember, but when we were landing in Kuwait, not Kuwait. We had flown somewhere, and we were on a airplane that was crewed by the South Korean Air Force. I had never flown with the South Korean Air Force, but apparently they were very scared about being in Iraq. And they were going to do what's called a combat landing, where they stay real high and get directly over the airfield and do this like corkscrew thing down and land real fast. And the plane is like half sideways, dropping like a rock, and it's nauseating. And I remember thinking, I'm going to be sick. I'm going to be sick. And we're crammed together in the C-130, and I'm pulling my feet as far apart as I can because I don't want to throw up on my boots. And I look down, and I see these shiny black boots. Because he either had too big of feet or too small feet, but they couldn't give him the brown boots. And I look up, and it's the chaplain. And he's looking at me, and he's turning green too. And I'm like, okay, I can't throw up on the chaplain's boots. So I'm just like, and then we landed, and it passed, and I made it. But I didn't throw up on the chaplain because he had black boots on.
War is hell.
It was. But
just for a minute, you're talking about the Koreans got involved as a support group?
So in the early days of the Iraq War, there were people there from everywhere. On our convoy up, we ran into the Italians, the Dutch. On our base, there were people from Denmark, Poland, all kinds of different places. There were, they didn't all send large groups, but lots of different countries. And I don't believe South Korea sent any ground troops, but they had a lot of airplanes.
Explain that to me.
Well, remember, it was a coalition in the early days. Coalition forces was the big word, and I think at the peak there was like 20 different countries.
Really?
Yep.
Wow. And why was it a coalition? Was it in support of America or what?
It was.
Or they felt threatened?
It was in support of the war on terror, and showing the world that this wasn't the United States government being mean to Iraq. This was the whole world agreeing that there was a problem there that needed to be addressed, and a lot of countries lent their support.
Yeah, very interesting. Did you fight along some of these folks?
Not until later tours. And I say fight. Later tours, I worked alongside some of them in later trips. But on that one, we encountered them in passing. We'd see them in the chow hall.
Okay, so we'll do fast forward because we've got 2 more tours to do.
Yeah,
here.
sorry.
No, this is all very, very good. It's very interesting stuff. So you're heading down to the 10th month. Did you have what they would call like a short timers helmet, cross off the dates, anything like that?
I didn't. I didn't want to count the days. I felt like I could be a jinx. I will say we all got very nervous on the last few missions patrols that we did were incredibly nerve-wracking. Just like, to come this far and have something happen, and no one took any crazy chances. We double-checked everything, and
Absolutely.
and
Okay, was it down to the day then, and you left on the day you were supposed to?
so we in that tour we actually got extended by a few weeks. We worked for the Marine Corps, and the unit that was coming in, I got to back up a little bit. We were pushed to the right a little bit. When we arrived in Iraq, the Marines had requested a battalion to run the security mission. We showed up as an armor battalion, tanks. An armor battalion in the Army is fairly small. We only had 450 people. The Marines were thinking infantry battalion, 650 people. We didn't have enough people to man the entire mission. So the Marines did what the Marines do. They built a provisional rifle company, which I had never heard that term, and they put the call out Marine Corps wide, and in 2 weeks, 220 people showed up at our base. Poof. From all across the Marine Corps, because they have that every Marine a rifleman theory. It works. I give them all the credit in the world.
Everyone's a rifleman.
And these people showed up. There were men, there were women, there were cooks, clerks, infantrymen, mechanics, you name it, all walks of life, and they showed up ready to go. And they gave them to us. So during that 10 months of my tour there, my platoon was made up of 18 soldiers and 9 Marines.
How'd that work out?
They mixed us. It was, I'll be honest, we give each other a hard time and poke fun, but that was by far the best time of my military career. The Marines treated us great.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a great story.
So when we got ready to leave, they already knew the potential for being shorthanded, so they had to patch together a Marine unit to come and augment our replacing unit. And then you do what's called a right seat, left seat ride, where we did 3 or 4 missions where we were in charge and they rode along and saw what we did. And then we did 3 or 4 missions where they were in charge and we rode along and watched what they did and critiqued them. And then that was it. We were like, okay, they did what's called a change of responsibility, gave them the mission, and then we had, I want to say, about 48 hours to pack our bags and go get on the plane.
That's amazing, and it flowed pretty well.
It did.
That combined effort.
It did. It's a good thing. They want to get all the information they can, and we don't want anyone to get killed, so we pass on every bit of knowledge that we gained. And
That's
and
an
then
interesting story.
we didn't have to drive home. We left all our equipment there. By that point, they had taken away our soft-skin vehicles and given us nice up-armored vehicles, and we felt much safer. But we left them and handed them over to the next unit, and we flew home.
The logistics are amazing,
It's amazing how they can move things when they need to.
isn't it?
Yeah.
It is truly. So on that last day, like they used to say, one day in a greasy egg.
Yep. One in a wake-up. That was it.
So tell me about that last day then, in preparation to leave.
It was kind of surreal. We all, I can remember we all were just sitting on our bags that were packed, ready to go, selling everything that we had acquired while we were there.
Like what would that be?
Oh, some people bought like little portable TVs and Xboxes and then never used them, or a portable refrigerator, little things that we could acquire here and there. And then we had to empty our tents. And we had all made furniture. We made benches or whatever out of scrap lumber, and we're like, here, have a bench. Just trying to give it away.
Home, huh?
Yeah, giving stuff away and mailing home as much as we could.
Sure.
And then waiting for the word to go to the airfield.
And how did you get out of there?
The U.S. Marine Corps flew us out on C-130s back to Kuwait.
To Kuwait, back to Kuwait.
And this was one thing, I guess, was a lesson learned from the Army. We got to Kuwait, and I want to say it was early in the morning, because we flew out in the morning, and it's a short flight. And they took us back to these same tents that had much better air conditioning than our tents in Iraq. And initially, we dropped our bags, and they were like, okay, we're going to have formation tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock for PT, and you're going to do this, and you're going to do that. And then all the leadership left to go get some briefings. And they came back and said, everything's canceled. They were like, we're going to be here for a week. You can do whatever you want. You can wear whatever uniform you want. Stay out of trouble. Goodbye. And they literally packed their bags and went to a different tent. And we were like, what happened here? And, who were they and where did our leaders go? And it come to find out, they were ordered from above to let us decompress. And they didn't want any stressors. You're not going to have the captain right next to your bunk, and you're not going to have to get up and get dressed. So, some people dealt with it in different ways. I got up and wandered all over and explored this camp. Some people slept for 3 days straight.
Exhausted.
But exhausted, mentally, just unwinding.
And I'm sorry, I missed, what did you do?
I couldn't sit still. I had like nervous energy, and we were back at Camp Burien, and I remember it was a long walk, like a mile, to the little PX there, and I would walk every day down there and walk through the little bazaar, and then walk back, learn to play ping pong and stuff like that. But
and by that time, you were able to communicate home with
call home.
That you're on your way.
Yep.
Right, great. You had to sleep pretty well. Or maybe you were just still adrenaline.
Oh no! By the end of walking around, I slept.
Yeah.
I slept well there.
Yeah. Well, okay. So you're all boarding these planes like you came.
Mm-hmm.
Every man is getting to go home.
Yep.
To a man.
Yep.
That's great.
In my unit. Yeah.
That's good. Okay, so you came back to Texas.
Back to Texas.
Okay, and then what happened after you tell me that gap of time then, before your next tour?
So I was at the time a commercial HVAC tech, air conditioning, heating, ventilation, air conditioning. I went back to work, and I had a bit of a hard time adjusting.
What was that like when you first walked in the door in the first week back home? Was that surreal to you?
It was completely surreal, like being on another planet.
I'm curious about this. In what way?
I had a hard time wrapping my head around the fact that nothing was about to kill me. I didn't realize how much of the time I spent looking around everywhere, studying everything. Right, and until my wife was like, calm down. Things on the side of the road drove me crazy, to the point where she finally wouldn't let me drive for a while. I would stop if there was a trash can in the street, and it just took
noises.
Just took a second to be like and drive, but it annoyed the people around me.
Sure.
I didn't really have a problem with noises because I was always around loud noise. Some things that affected me were smells, like. Everything they cooked over there was cooked over fire, and even now, like certain things on the barbecue will take me back in a heartbeat.
It triggers.
And like, ooh. But
sights, smells, sounds.
Smells, sights, some sounds. But
how soon did you get back to work?
So I went back to work fairly quickly. I want to say I was home for 2 weeks. I went back to work.
Were you anxious to get back to routine?
I was. I wanted to. We were trying to buy a house and do some other things, and I needed to get back working.
Now you were around Fort Hood?
I was in the Dallas area at this point.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And I was home less than a year before we were going back.
Okay, then getting that adjustment underway, then they called you back up?
So this is where I was probably my own worst enemy for a few years. A friend of mine, he was my platoon sergeant, who's still kind of my mentor, was like, hey, this other unit's going and they don't have enough people. You want to go? And I was like, I don't know, are you going? And he's like, well, yeah. I said, then sign me up.
Okay, and your wife said? You don't have to answer that.
I didn't tell her I volunteered. I said, I gotta go.
Okay, we'll leave that one alone. Was it because maybe this adrenaline thing, you had to get back to the adrenaline?
I absolutely think that's what it was. On all of my subsequent tours. I was.
Avoided action is with your buddies.
Yeah. I couldn't let it go. It was hard, and I jumped at the chance to go back. And it was a different unit. I still knew some of the people because a lot of us jumped at the chance to go right back. And so this time we were going to do a convoy security mission. That's the whole thing we were going to do, was escort convoys from Kuwait to Baghdad and other points.
Did you know that?
I did. We knew we were going to do that. And that was part of the allure because that was a pretty dangerous mission, and it also required the shortest train out. My first tour, we trained at Fort Hood for 5 months before we left. This one was 30 days. And then we were going. So we mobilized at home station and went to Camp Shelby, Mississippi to train up. And that place was terrible. Just as bad as Fort Polk, if not worse.
Swampland.
Literally, the first morning, and it's hot in the summertime in Mississippi, I woke up and I swung my feet out of bed and put my feet in 4 inches of water. And it was like, what happened? My flip-flops were floating away. It flooded the barracks, and this was not all that long after Katrina, and that place was terrible.
Was it?
Camp Shelby, south of Hattiesburg, Mississippi, down near the coast. Terrible
After
place.
Katrina.
Oh, this was 2 years after Katrina, but the trees were still down everywhere, and that place was hit hard. But so anyway, we trained to do convoy escort there, and left from Gulfport, Mississippi. This was a terrible day. This is a hard one for me for a stupid reason.
Okay. We have a lot of tears in these interviews.
I knew my daughter was about to graduate from high school, and we were leaving, and I couldn't go. And I remember we were on the airfield in Gulfport, Mississippi, and it was noisy, and my phone rang, and I couldn't hear, and I was trying to answer the phone, and all I could hear was like static and kind of hollering, and it got quiet for a second, and I heard him call my daughter's name as she crossed the stage, and then I knew what it was, and that was hard, and
that's a tough one.
yeah,
It's a lot of sacrifice.
yeah. I missed her college graduation for another deployment later. Anyway,
It's just so much of being military, these major events. It really is. Nothing you can do about it. Yeah. But you were in Gulfport?
And the plane was too heavy to take off. We were on a 747, biggest thing in the world, and someone in our unit had made a mistake and forgot to ship our heavy machine guns on the ship with the rest of the equipment. So we were trying to bring like 60 or 70 50 caliber machine guns on this airplane in the cargo in crates, but they're so heavy with all the people, it overloaded the plane. So we sat there for hours while they were trying to figure out what to do. We couldn't leave the machine guns, so in the end they left people. So they went and pulled like 60 people off the plane and said, we'll get them on the next flight. And we finally leave, which screwed up the whole chain of events. I remember they towed this plane out to the end of the runway and like backed it up to the fence and firewalled the throttles and held the brakes, and the plane was shaking and it took off, and I'm looking out the window and I swear we hit the fence at the end of the runway. It almost couldn't get off the ground because that's a tiny little airport and a giant airplane. So that was the first eventful part. We got in the air and it messed up the timeline and all the stops. Whenever you land in Kuwait, they would have you land at night for both security reasons, and cooler air is thicker, denser, and better for airplanes to fly. Well, we ended up getting there at like 2 in the afternoon on that 132 degree day, and we did like 4 or 5 go-arounds. The plane was just wallering, and finally the guy came on and he was like, we're low on fuel, we have to land, it might be bumpy, hold on. And we're like, oh, as we come down, and we hit like a ton of bricks, and I don't know if it damaged the plane, but we stopped out on the runway, and they brought buses out and took us off, and people with flashlights were crawling around under the airplane. I don't know what happened.
And this was just the beginning.
This was day 1 of tour number 2, and yeah. But
so did you go back to your tent?
we went back to the tents in Kuwait, to the same place. I mean, not the same tent. We went back to Camp Burien. And we spent about a week there. We did the same thing. We had to qualify with or verify our rifle 0. We didn't have to, we didn't convoy up, but it was much less of a moment when they handed out the live ammo this time, because it was like, okay, been there, done that. Yeah. Now we're just trying
Now, at this point, how are you feeling about your decision?
I'm still ready at this point, because I'm back in my element, is kind of the way I feel about it. And, you know, I've gotten promoted. I have my soldiers that I have to take care of and concentrate on now, and I'm trying to pass on what I know to them, because they're nervous, and I know what they're going through. And I'm trying to make it better for them. And we get our stuff together there, and then we flew on the U.S. Air Force up to Tallil Air Base, which is in South Central.
I haven't heard of that one.
You have heard of that one?
I have not.
Tallil? It's right near Fob Cedar. Tallil is the main logistics base between Kuwait and Baghdad. Every bit of supplies that comes in the country stops at Fob Cedar, which is right next to Tallil Air Base, and that's where it picks up its heaviest armed escort for the trip north.
You know, for the record, are you saying forward FOB?
Yes, Cedar.
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 Okay, got it.
Not sure what that was named after.
Okay.
And this is where we ran our convoys out of. We got, I think, one convoy with the outgoing unit for the right seat, left seat. Wasn't very thorough. It was just there wasn't enough time. They were like, "This is what we're doing," and that's what we did for 9.5 months.
9.5 months this time.
Yeah.
And kind of the same mission. By the way, okay, tell me again, this was what year now?
This was in 07, 08.
708. Okay, the war continues on. What are your thoughts? We're going to win this thing, or what are your thoughts? Because you've gone back now.
So a lot has changed. All of my trips, everything was different. And just to back up a little, in the first trip, rules of engagement. If you feel threatened, shoot. There was not very much restriction on what you could and couldn't do. By the time the second one came along, it was far different. They did not want to alienate the population, and they were not going to do it. Before you shot someone, you needed to go through a whole bunch of steps. And I think this is good. It was
Tell me why.
to keep from just people randomly mowing people down or indiscriminately firing their weapons without realizing what's behind it or that kind of thing. You needed to be sure. So that was one of the first big shockers when we got the briefing on rules of engagement. This is what you're going to do. We also got there right as the first Iraqi election was happening.
Did you see it?
We did. We were there for that. Everybody with their little purple thumbs.
Did you see that?
Yeah, and everybody coming out and voting. That was pretty monumentous. They kind of locked us down for the day of the election and the day after, I think, where they wanted to let them have that entirely on their own. There was no Americans out on the streets anywhere in Iraq during the election.
That was a huge deal. Did you actually ever see the purple finger?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Did you ever hear any Iraqi talk about it, or did you get that up close to them?
Not really. You know, some of the people that worked in our bases, I saw it because they came in. They were vetted.
I mean, that had to be a very big deal to them.
It was. It was huge. And I couldn't tell you anything about the election, whether it was corrupt or not, but they were proud to have had an election because it was the first one in these people's lifetime. Saddam had been there for so long, unopposed.
And it was because of who and what that happened?
It was because we removed their government, the U.S. military and the coalition.
Removed Saddam.
Removed Saddam.
I'm going to ask you a trick question.
Uh-oh.
Were there weapons of mass destruction in the country, in your opinion? Is that a tough...
You can't print this. You know, I don't know. The only thing I can tell you, and I will tell you this, on my first tour, at one point, we were assigned to take a break from a patrol and escort a Bosnian EOD team, which I thought was crazy because Bosnia is full of mines and they should have had other people at home. But they sent a team who's experienced in explosive ordnance disposal, and we escorted them to a bunker complex down near Nasiriya. And we didn't really know why. we got there and pulled up, and the people that were guarding the facility were like, go that way. So we drove and drove and drove and saw a sign for a bunker number that they had told us, and we stopped. And then we turn around, and the Bosnians are getting out of their vehicles, and they're in all of their chemical gear, and we're not. And we're like, you think you could have told us? And they were like, oh, you're fine, we're going in there. And we're like, okay. And they were like, but you might want to back up. They had mustard gas artillery shells in that bunker, and they were defusing them. That's the only thing I ever... Well, they didn't shoot them at anyone. Yeah. Just they were in the bunker, and they went in there and defused a bunch of them. And I think they collapsed the bunker on top to secure it, but I couldn't tell you. But that's the only thing I ever saw or heard.
Any rumors along the way in your tours? Rumors out? Okay, interesting. So you were escorting roadside then?
We were escorting convoys. So what we would do is, this was an incredibly long, drawn-out process. We would show up at midnight for a convoy that leaves at 6 o'clock in the morning. And we would get a briefing on the route of where we were going to go, and line up our vehicles in our order, and then we would link up with anywhere from 40 to 60 trucks that were driven by civilian contractors from KBR. And KBR, Kellogg, Brown and Root.
Say it again.
Kellogg, Brown and Root.
Okay, don't know that one. Go ahead.
But KBR is the biggest contractor that did everything over there.
Okay, gotcha.
And then we would go through this big brief, check all our weapons, everything, make sure it's ready, and then we would roll out, and we had a strict line where our first 2 trucks would go, and then 10 civilian trucks, another Army truck, 10 civilian trucks, another Army truck, until we had the whole convoy. And then we would roll over to Fob Cedar 2, which was only like a mile down the road. And then the KBR contracting people would like scan all their trucks out. They're very particular on making sure everybody's accounted for. And then we would drive, and then it was about a 9-hour drive to Baghdad from where we were.
Long time.
Yeah, and we would stop. Someone would always get a flat tire or whatever, and if it was the contractors, they had a wrecker that would go with them, and they would take care of themselves. If it was us, we would take care of ourselves.
But these were civilians you were escorting, securing.
Yep.
In that tour, any incidents along the way?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, like what was going on?
Roadside bombs. They liked it. On the main highway, we didn't have any. We had a place we went called Camp Delta that was right on the Iranian border, and that was kind of a hot spot. It always made me nervous. And
because the Iranians were probably
I don't know.
busy? We don't know.
That was the guess, but it was a hostile area. They didn't like us. It didn't matter what we did. We'd go through there, and the locals would come out and throw rocks and bricks at us and everything. And they blew up a good-sized bomb right in front of me that hit a tanker in front of us, and it didn't blow up, which is never figured that out to this day why it didn't. But
yeah, no kidding. Kids, adults, young people.
All of the above.
All of the above. Little girls, boys, all of them.
And they knew our rules of engagement. I mean, you're not going to shoot someone that throws a rock at you anyway, but they had zero fear to walk up beside the road and try to break out your window. And they're armored windows, but they would still crack.
Was that just kind of a heartbreak to see these young kids just in that mode, I mean, that behavior, and they're young. You think about kids back home, going to school, and what a contrast.
It does. It's one of those things where you wish you could talk to them for 5 minutes. It's like, we're not your enemy. We're not here to wreck your life. I don't know who's filling your head with whatever they're filling it with, but stop listening to them.
By the way, did you experience much of the culture while you were there? I mean, were kids going to school? Was it mostly poverty? Was there industry, marketplaces? What was your
I got to experience probably every extreme of that. On my first trip was not too long after the invasion. The country was kind of in ruins, and it was pretty poverty, although the cities were functioning. Markets were open. By the second tour, it was a whole lot better. You could definitely see people were working. There were factories going. People were building houses. You know, the 18-wheelers loaded with goods were moving all around. On the civilian side, I mean, they were functioning. And by the third trip, which we can get to as quickly as we can, I was in downtown Baghdad proper, and I mean, there was a Dodge dealer on the corner that was open and running, and an Ace Hardware. I mean, literally with the signs and everything. So I mean, they're very well functioning these days.
Today.
This was in 2011 was my last time, and they were functioning very well.
I'm going to get to your third tour just to explain what from that tour what it's like, and then move forward, because that is really interesting that they became that progressive.
Mm-hmm. But back to the second one, some of the places they didn't like us, they were still functional. Stores were open. They would just stop what they were doing to throw rocks at us, and I really don't know why. We blocked up their streets for 10 minutes while the convoy came through. We didn't stop, and it wasn't terribly obtrusive. And on that particular trip, I think there was one time ever when shots were fired by us. They shot at us fairly regularly, but
because. Do you think they understood why the coalition was there? Did they know the riddance of Saddam Hussein? Did they understand the mission? If you could call an average Iraqi.
I think they understood it in terms of what the words mean, but there was still so much corruption within the country that a lot of the good that we didn't make it down to the average person.
It did not.
It was getting siphoned off at much higher levels.
Oh, that's too bad.
It is.
That's kind of typical. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
Too bad. Okay, so you had your share of incidents on your second tour. And were the living conditions pretty much the same?
It was much better on the second one. At Tallil, we had what's called a CHU, or a containerized housing unit.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically, have you ever seen a 20-foot container, like on the back of a truck?
Mm-hmm.
It was one of those that was converted into living quarters. It was air conditioned.
So hot.
No, it was air conditioned and insulated. Actually had a window.
Right. Little curtains there.
Yeah, and there were two of us in each one of those, and they were nice. They were really nice. They didn't have running water. But there was a shower trailer 100 feet away. But
you know, I hadn't asked you yet. You mentioned the MREs. But were they MREs all the way through your tours?
on none of my tours did I ever eat an MRE.
What?
I may have eaten one or two while we were out on the long patrols, but the food in Iraq, I don't know how much money they spent on it, but it was well worth it. We never went hungry. There was always mountains of food, and it was good. The contractors cooked.
Cultural food?
Oh no, this was American food,
Yeah.
and they had quite the variety from what they called comfort food, like pizza, hamburgers, hot dogs, every day, and then good food. You might have meatloaf, roast beef, turkey, whatever, so you got to pick. Nice salad bars, different themed nights. I think it was Wednesday night was stir fry.
Oh, come on.
I'm getting hungry thinking about this, because you'd walk through it was like, we're going to get stir fry, and you'd go over there and the guy would, I want beef, I want onions, I want veggies, and he would stir fry it right there for you, crack an egg in it and cook it and then give it to you over rice.
That's worth this, just telling that. That's interesting. You're blowing the whole war effort right here.
The contracted food, and that's where, I feel like, Vietnam and World War II, I don't even want to talk around those guys, because they had it so much worse than we did.
Yeah. Oh, that's a very interesting story. Well, let's see, fast forward, because boy, this is all such good information. 9.5 months you were on your second one. Did you feel at the end of those 9 months you had made a difference?
No. We transported so much stuff back and forth. There were times when we might escort. I'll tell you what made me feel that way. So we brought probably 40 or 60 flatbeds loaded with Chevy Colorado pickup trucks that were painted blue and white. They were going to the Iraqi National Police Department. I delivered them all, and then like 6 weeks later there was a story in Stars and Stripes about how the the general, they used army ranks in their police department in charge of the police in Basra or somewhere, sold all those vehicles to civilians for cash, pocketed the money, and moved to Jordan. And it was like, whew,
Wow.
you know, we could have got killed transporting that stuff, not to
Wow.
mention that the taxpayers paid for it.
Wow.
We're trying to help them establish their police department, and then the corruption gets it again.
Unbelievable. Boy. So
I don't know. I didn't see a lot of change
that's,
there.
yeah,
but-
well, you're being very straightforward. Well, you come home back to Texas again, kind of the same routine, going back to Kuwait, getting on board and coming into Dallas?
Dallas.
Dallas, okay. And then, then you go back to a job then? About how long were you in your
So
job?
that one, I was back that time for a little more than a year. I think I want to say 14 months. And I got a similar phone call about someone that was going, and this one was to be a very different mission. And they told me not that they couldn't tell me what it was, but they didn't know what it was, just that people were being hand selected for it. And
Well, that was seductive.
oh, it was, and I said, I'm in.
Yeah.
And so that one came around, and they mobilized for this particular mission. I think they mobilized like 110 of us, knowing that only 60 people were going to go do it,
That's pretty hand-picked there.
so they could weed through everybody. And the guy that I knew that called me, I didn't know until later, was the one doing the weeding out.
Interesting.
And it wasn't any super spectacular thing. It turned out to be a mission providing security for some high-level officials when they moved around Baghdad. Just augmented security for people that went to meet with government officials and stuff like that. Nothing.
Okay,
No.
how long was that tour?
So it was supposed to be 12 months, but if you remember, right around the end of 2010, 2011, they were declaring the war over. There was no unit scheduled to follow us. When we left, that was supposed to be it. And at some point during that tour, that changed. And they said, oh, we're going to continue this mission, but we don't have anyone in the pipeline. So we need to start training someone up. That's going to take a little time. Will you guys stay an extra 3 months? And they didn't make it mandatory, but unanimously, we
You were willing to.
we enjoyed that mission so much that we stayed.
Why did you enjoy it so much?
This was one that felt like we were making a difference. They were out, you know, trying to make deals and get the Iraqi government going. And I don't know what they did specifically. Again, we provided security. We drove the
For
trucks.
all Iraqi officials?
No, this was U.S. people meeting with Iraqis, just gauging how they felt about the American people and our presence in the country and what we could do to be less offensive or more helpful or whatever. It was.
What was it to become democratic? Was that kind of nation building?
It was and that's what they were doing. Again, I had no part in that other than providing the security, but it seemed like a far more worthwhile mission.
Oh, by the time you left, do you feel like it was effective?
By the time I left the country, over all the years of change, I think we did a lot of good.
Tell me why. Some examples.
The people, and on this tour I got to interact with a lot of the public a lot more because of what we did and where we were, and the people weren't terribly hostile toward us, but they had better lives. You know, the guy would be like, look, I just bought a new Kia, you know, and you know, I have a job. I work in the factory down there that makes whatever. But business was being conducted. Things were happening, you know, the airport was functioning. They could go and fly and visit relatives.
Really?
And you know, things
How
were.
about the government itself, beyond Saddam?
It was functioning by the time I left. The Iraqi police would write tickets. You had to actually go register your car. I mean, they were getting back, you know, to what we would kind of consider normal here.
That's
You know,
interesting.
infrastructure was improving. People had water. The electricity stayed on. You know, everything didn't go dark at night or go dark for hours at a time. Things were working.
And how about the oil fields?
I wasn't anywhere near the oil fields. The Eldora refinery in Baghdad was up and running. The gas stations in Baghdad had gas. There were people able to drive and go do what they wanted to do.
That's very
City
interesting.
parks were open. I mean, it just it seemed like a lot more functioning society than it was in the early days.
And you attribute that to what?
One, removing the dictatorship. But it wasn't just that. I think it was going through, they went through several leadership changes over those years. And I think it was a matter of removing some of the old guard, if you will, and putting in some more modern people. They still have their beliefs and their culture, and they didn't get away from that. Just maybe people that were a little more open, or they realized they didn't need to take because it's going to get cut off. They needed to build, and continue to have it come in.
Interesting.
You know,
they are still having elections?
Mm-hmm.
For, I mean, hopefully fairly honest.
Hopefully. I haven't followed it too much since then, but I know that the president that was there when I was there is not anymore. They have another one, so they're definitely doing it.
Would you think it is a little bit more democratic these days then?
I would hope so, but I couldn't.
Yeah. Okay. Your last assignment, you left the country what year?
In February of 2011.
11. Have you, since you got home, have you kept track of any of the news, Iraqi politics, culture, way of life at all?
I follow a little bit of it, and I know we still have a lot of contractors over there that are supporting military equipment that we sold them, so it hasn't been stolen, siphoned off, because the contractors wouldn't be there working on it.
What are the contractors doing?
They're supporting, like we sold them F-16 fighters and helicopters and Abrams tanks, and
We are?
yeah. Slightly different versions of all of those, but
who are they fighting? Who would they be fighting?
they are fighting ISIS in some areas.
They really
in
are.
northern Iraq, yeah.
Well, that brings, boy, I could go on for another hour. ISIS, we didn't even talk about that. Where are they today?
I couldn't speak on that. I know they're still functioning in Syria, and there's some in northern Iraq, but I don't know the details on that.
So they pretty much are diminished, ineffective.
Or at least hiding. Out of sight, out of mind. But
So that would have been another positive,
yeah.
ridding the country of them.
Well, Al Qaeda was the threat when we were there, and they definitely went away.
They
They just morphed into something else.
morphed, yeah. So how would you describe, as far as you know, Iraq today? You said functioning,
Mm-hmm.
productive,
Mm-hmm.
better life.
Definitely.
Boy, that is interesting. So you came home after that tour feeling really good about your mission.
Mm-hmm.
And you did what when you got home?
So that one, I still didn't want to take off the uniform at that point. And there wasn't a bunch more tours going on. So I volunteered at that point to be cadre at the Warrior Transition Battalion at Joint Base Lewis McChord. And I went there, and I spent 2 years there helping the wounded, injured, and ill soldiers in that program
Did you?
either transition out of the Army or transition back into the Army. But
Great mission.
that was a very rewarding mission.
Yeah.
Very, very much so.
Very critical.
Yeah.
So then, beyond Fort Lewis, then moving forward.
Then I went back to Texas in 2013, and I very briefly went back into the air conditioning business, and then an opportunity came to join the AGR program and be full-time, and I transitioned from a combat arms soldier to a supply soldier, which has its own challenges, but
They love you.
I felt I'd be better off leaving the hard stuff to the kids, and I'll just give them everything they need to do it going forward.
It's
And,
all a team.
Yeah.
All a team. So you eventually have ended up here in Walla.
Yep.
And altogether, how many years then?
I have 23 years total time, and 14 of it are active.
14 active. How many more years ahead of you? We don't know yet.
Don't know. I've got a little over 5 and some change for active duty retirement, which is my goal. But Just have to see what the world holds.
Yeah. Looking to the future, any ideas beyond the military?
I want to find a little piece of land somewhere quiet and relax.
You've earned it.
My goal is not to have to work once I hit retirement, and I'm trying to make that happen.
Have totally earned it. And your wife is working now?
My wife is not. My wife was a school teacher for many years, and when we were still in Texas, she was diagnosed with colon cancer, and barely made it through that one, and she suffered some pretty severe nerve damage from the chemo, and has a hard time walking, so she's disabled. But she's still with me, and that's good.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to meet that woman. She's quite the trooper.
She is.
Very strong through it all. So, is there anything that you would like to add to this amazing journey of yours in looking back?
Oh, man, that's a tough one. I don't know. My wife's been the trooper. She broke the cycle of me chasing war.
How'd she do that? If that's not too personal.
It's not, and I don't know specifically. She kept me grounded. I was at the end of that third one, and by the time I got done at the WTB, I was being fairly self-destructive, looking for that rush. You never really feel more alive than when someone's trying to kill you, and she just helped keep me grounded and see that there's more to life than that.
And she recognized that, and some don't. They don't deal.
Right.
So maybe you've already answered this, but how has your service so far and experiences affected your life? Maybe you've answered it.
Honestly, I definitely have no regrets. Being in the Army has it allowed me to, or it greatly helped me buy a home. It's given me a good life. Thankfully, my wife recognized and kept me sane in here and not constantly chasing crazy things. But a lot of what I've experienced, I wouldn't wish it on anyone, but I wouldn't trade the experience for anything. It's I've seen the horrible things that man can do to man, and I've seen a whole lot of the world, and it's given me an appreciation for life, and it's helped me to not sweat the small stuff, so to speak, and definitely be happy with where I am and what I have.
Good answers. Very good answers. Just one more additional. You did mention you lost someone along the way.
I did.
Over in Iraq.
Yep. One of the 6 guys that we all came in together. We were all older. We were all in our 30s with a bunch of kids, and we had all come back in. That first drill was our first drill, and I had been at Taqaddum for about 3 months. He ended up with a different unit in a different place, and his Humvee hit an IED and rolled over, and he was in the turret, and it killed him. And,
do you mind mentioning his name?
Sergeant Steve Morin, Morin.
Morin.
Yep, Morin.
Do you keep in touch with his family?
Yeah, I don't. I didn't really meet his family. It was just we always hung out at drill, and when we mobilized, a couple of people for whatever reason got sliced off to other units, and he was one that left. So once we mobilized, I didn't see him again until I heard the news that he didn't make it.
So sorry. And any reunions?
We've actually had several reunions from my first tour.
Yeah.
It's been really good to see those people, and it's interesting. Of my first tour, as of about 2 months ago, I'm the only one left still in the Army. Everybody else is retired.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay.
I'm the last one serving, so.
That's fantastic. Either one of you have any additional questions? Vic, any questions?
Well, do you belong to any service organizations?
I do not. I probably should.
Maybe down the road.
The VFW or one of those.
I know you ride motorcycles.
Well, yeah, the Combat Vets Motorcycle Association. I'm in that one.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's a fun one.
It is.
Yeah, you betcha. Oh, gosh. I could spend another hour. Thank you, Sergeant Ed. Very, very much for your time for this interview. I get emotional. He knows I do. Every time. But I love the military. I truly love you guys and what you do for our country. So, thank you so much.
Thank you.